to episode 34 on the journey to conscious healthcare. This is series 6 and it's called From Theory to Practice, Mastering Positive Behaviour Support, episode 1. In this podcast, we explore what it takes to consciously create longevity, happiness and fulfillment in your life and that of others. The journey to conscious healthcare looks at the healthcare industry, disability sector, and how to best navigate these areas to get the best for you and your life. I'm your host, Trevor, and I'm the founder and CEO of Conscious Healthcare SA, an expert company that is known for high-quality healthcare services and transforming the healthcare industry in the disability space. Today's episode is also sponsored by Conscious Healthcare SA. Conscious Healthcare SA has 2 clinics now. One is up north in South Australia in Mawson Lakes, and the other is down south where I am today in Seacliff. Not only that, we have instant capacity coming up for psychology services, and you've heard it first here. Get in touch via our website or please call our team to ensure you don't have to sit on yet another wait list. Joining us today is Dr. Erin Leif. She is a senior lecturer in the School of Education, Psychology and Counselling, Faculty of Education at Monash University. Erin's work places a strong emphasis on the critical importance of upholding and safeguarding the inherent dignity, equality, and freedoms of every individual. At the core of her research lies a deep commitment to promoting social justice and inclusivity, ensuring that the rights of all people, but particularly people with disabilities, are recognised and protected. Erin's current research focuses on ways to help parents, teachers, and behaviour support practitioners use positive, preventative, evidence-based practices when supporting people with diverse learning needs in home, school, and community settings. Her research interests include positive behaviour support, multi-tiered systems of support, trauma-informed behaviour support, and universal design for learning. To start with, welcome to the podcast here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Not a worry at all. Now, we've got a personal question to kick off with, just a nice and easy one. You chose the challenging one, but that's all good. How has failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favourite failure of yours?
My favorite failure is the fact that I dropped out of school when I was 14. I had a really, really hard time in school. I struggled a lot with mental health as a child. And I was a chronic school refuser. I did not have an easy time at school. And eventually I just kind of gave up and decided, no, not going to do this anymore. And that was really challenging for myself and my family. And fortunately, my parents were brave enough to look at alternative schooling options. And I ended up re-enrolling in a very alternative school. And I absolutely thrived. And it was the absolute best experience that I could have had for my own education, my growth, learning about who I was as a person, what I was capable of. And that really set me up on a pathway to pursue higher education after I graduated from high school and to just smash it as a university student because I was really motivated to be there. I knew about myself. I knew how I learned. I knew the supports that I needed and I could advocate. And I did really, really well in university. And that saw me through all the way to getting my PhD, which I don't think anyone would have ever looked at 14-year-old Erin and thought she was going to get a PhD and go on to this type of career. So although I struggled a lot as a school-age kid growing up, with the support of my family and finding a really, really great supportive alternative school, I was able to completely turn it around, and I'm really happy with where I've ended up.
That's an incredible journey there, Erin. That's incredible. Especially, I can really pick on the whole insights, and it sounds like you almost maybe didn't use PBS, but I think like you used definitely insights and reflections and self-awareness to understand what was unique for you. And I think that's really important because obviously you've found out that, you can study, you can obviously concentrate, all these different things, right? And you've been thriving. So I think many would say that you've been relatively successful being a leader in the PBS space, positive behaviour support for those that are listening.
Yeah, it really gave me an insight into how people might be different and people might present with unique challenges, but people are really capable. They just need to be in the right environment that supports them to thrive. And that environment is going to look different for different people. And so part of what we have to do is really figure out what that could look like for the individual that we're supporting, and how can we create that capable environment around them, which is actually a core component of PBS. And so ending up in this, role, doing this work is really, really, I think, come full circle.
100%. Well, I think whilst we're on that, I think it'd be great to jump into an overview of what PBS is. So for those listening, this is all going to go in quite deep pretty quickly, but let's start off with the basics. So what is PBS? Can you please explain why it's crucial in supporting people with behaviours of concern?
I will. I'm going to read you a definition of PBS that I really like. So this definition was put forth by Don Kincaid and colleagues in 2016. And this definition was informed by consultation that the researchers did with the wider PBS community. And I like this definition because it really emphasizes the diverse applications of PBS across cohort settings and levels of implementation. So they say that PBS is an approach to behavior support that includes an ongoing process of research-based assessment, intervention, and data-based decision-making focused on building social and other functional competencies, creating supportive contexts, and preventing the occurrence of behaviors of concern. PBS relies on strategies that are respectful of a person's dignity and overall well-being, and that are drawn primarily from behavioral, educational, and social sciences, although other evidence-based procedures might be incorporated. PBS is applied within a multi-tiered framework at the level of the individual, at the level of larger systems, for example, classrooms, families, social service programs. So what I really like about this definition is that it maintains a commitment to the use of strategies that uphold a person's dignity, that are respectful of a person's rights, and aims to enhance the person's well-being and quality of life. And also it recognizes that PBS isn't just an individual written plan. PBS is about creating systems that support people with disabilities who are at the center of the process, as well as staff, family members, organizational leaders, to work collaboratively to address systemic issues that prevent people with disabilities from experiencing inclusion, choice, and self-determination. So that's kind of a research-based definition of PBS. What's PBS to me? PBS is an approach for supporting people to live a good life. And it's particularly applied to people, or used with people who maybe have behaviors of concern and experience restrictive practices. Positive behavior support is ultimately a way that we can build skills. We can build the skills of people with disabilities, skills like self-advocacy, making decisions, expressing their choices, being able to do more of the things that they like and love and want to do in life, but also building the skills of people around the person with disability. So support workers, family members, teachers. And through that, we should see reductions in behaviors of concern as a side effect, not as the main goal of the support that we're delivering. It's all about building capabilities of the person, capabilities of the key significant others around the person, and the capabilities of that environment around the person. And when we look at PBS and sort of zoom out and look at it kind of from a more macro level, it's a framework. It's not an intervention. It's not a single type of intervention, but it's a framework for delivering a range of evidence-based strategies and supports. And the framework is really kind of drawing on some core areas. The first is behavior science. So the field of behavior science has really given us an understanding of concepts and principles of learning and behavior, why behavior happens. And the research in behavior science has shown us that the application of different support strategies can be effective for supporting people to develop skills. It also draws on prevention science, or the idea that we want to be really proactive and preventative in our approach so that people, the majority of people, can have their needs met at the universal tier of intervention. and that we can minimize the number of people who require more intensive, costly supports down the road. And finally, implementation science. And implementation science is all about bridging the know-do gap. In other words, how can we get implementation of evidence-based practices that we know can help people in real-world settings? What does it take to achieve that? And finally, PBS really is underpinned by a human rights model of disability. It's about understanding that people with disability have the same rights as all of us, and their disability status should not and cannot be used as an excuse to strip them of their human rights. So positive behavior support ultimately should be delivered in ways that respect and uphold a person's human rights at its core.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so for the average Joe person, just to use an example, say, of a behaviour of concern, so maybe absconding, or what might be a couple just off the tip of your tongue, some behaviours of concerns that you might see, and then how PBS might be involved in order to enable that person to function as best as they possibly can and live a happy, independent life, and it's also healthy.
That's a great question. The first thing that we have to ask ourselves is, what is a behavior of concern? Behaviors of concern generally are behaviors that occur at a frequency or an intensity that put the welfare, the well-being of the person or others at risk. So these behaviors can cause physical or psychological harm. They generally put the person at risk for experiencing exclusion, restrictive practices, or a whole host of other negative life outcomes. So these behaviors might include things like aggression, self-injurious behavior, eating inedible objects, property destruction, going out into the community and running off, lack of sort of that safety awareness that puts people at risk for getting injured as a result of running into traffic. So it's important that when we're identifying, a behavior of concern, that we have to be really clear on, yes, everyone on the team agrees that this is a behavior of concern and that behavior change is important. And most of all, that behavior change is important to the person at the center of the process, the person with disabilities. So once we've identified the behavior of concern, the next thing we need to do is we need to think functionally. We don't develop behavior support strategies simply based on what the behavior of concern looks like. We have to recognize that behaviors of concern happen for different reasons. And often behaviors of concern are a way that the person is communicating. It's a form of communication. And so using the process of functional behavior assessment, which is an evidence-based assessment approach, that can allow us to understand what is the function of the behavior. So what we see, the topography of the behavior or what it looks like, is sort of the tip of the iceberg. It's what we see at the very top, but all the rest of the iceberg, everything below the surface, is behavior function. And that's what we need to look at. And so it could be that the person is communicating distress, that they're not feeling well, or that they're hungry, or that they're tired, or that they want something that they don't have access to. So it could be that the behavior is communicating something like that. It could be that the person is in a context where the demands of that context, the expectations of that context exceed what the person can do. So the behavior is telling you, get me the heck out of here. Like, I don't want to do this. It could be that the behavior is indicating that a person is, experiencing a really problematic environment from a sensory perspective. They're experiencing some form of sensory overwhelm, the noise level, the lighting, the temperature, something about the environment isn't working for them. That's what we really need to do first and foremost, is uncover what is the function of this behavior? What is this person communicating to me with their behavior? Once we've done that, then we can develop a whole range of function-based behavior support strategies. And so we might look at, what is it about this environment around the person that isn't working for them? And how do we change the environment? How can we change something about the sensory input in the environment? How can we change something about that person's opportunity for choice and control within their environment? How can we reduce restrictions within that person's environment? Then we need to look at how do we teach this person safer and more understandable ways of communicating with us? So, for example, do they need an alternative method of communication? It's really important to recognize that communication isn't just spoken language, but communication can take lots of different forms, including behaviors of concern. And so we need to really look at finding the right alternative method of communicating for that person, whether it's pictures, gestures, body language, or vocal speech, vocal approximations. We really, really, really need to support the person to use alternative methods of communicating so that they can communicate their wants and needs. And then finally, if we are teaching the person to communicate with us, we have to be responsive to their communication. So we need to coach other people around the person that when this person uses their pictures, for example, to tell them that they want something or that they don't want something or that they're unhappy about something, we need to respond to that communication and support the person to have their needs met in that moment. Using those strategies can be a really, really powerful way to build the person's capabilities, to change the environment around the person, to support their success. And again, we see behaviors of concern reduce as a side effect.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think what would be quite useful is going through the process in regards to what happens. So say, for example, and before we do that, I might jump into restrictive practices was mentioned. I think it might be worthwhile just explaining what restrictive practices are, viewpoint in regards to it. I know that they're a last case, and I think that there's a movement to remove them altogether. But can you go on to that first, and then we'll jump into the actual process of how a PBS plan might be put together, but also how it goes, data collecting, all that sort of stuff.
So a restrictive practice is any practice that has the effect of limiting the freedom of movement or the rights of a person with disabilities. And so regulated restrictive practices are those that are sort of regulated by the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Those include physical restraint, which is physically preventing a person from moving; chemical restraint, which is the use of medication for the purposes of controlling behavior; mechanical restraint, which is the use of devices like helmets or arm limiters or splints or other types of like seat belts or belts to limit a person's free range of motion; seclusion, which is putting a person in a room by themselves without free ability to leave that room; and environmental restraint, which is locking cabinets, removing things from the environment. So there are those 5 different types of restrictive practices. Currently, to use a restrictive practice, it has to be authorized, meaning that that person has a behavior support plan in place that describes alternative strategies to better support that person, with the ultimate goal being to reduce and eliminate the use of those restrictive practices. However, that is tricky, and it takes quite a bit of skill to be able to implement behavior support plans well, so that we can see real, true, meaningful reductions in the use of restrictive practices over time. I think within the sector right now, there's still pretty widespread concern that restrictive practices are often overused, misused, or used as the first and only approach for people with behaviors of concern. And that is a really high priority area for the NDIS in particular, to focus on reduction of the use of those practices.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, so let's jump into the actual process. So what I mean by that, and I'm sure you'll elaborate a lot more than I will, but we're talking about from going out there to your first visit from the practitioner through to your interim plan, maybe some training all the way through. You've got your FBA, all that sort of stuff, right? So I'd love to go through the process in regards to what someone can expect from Woe to Go, because there's a lot of time where a PBS practitioner or positive behaviour support practitioner might not directly be in touch with the participant, but they're doing work behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So can we walk through not just a day in the life of the participant, but what's the practitioner do, so then the participant or the patient as such can understand what's happening throughout the journey, because there's many steps. I think it's almost like a 12-step journey.
Yeah, look, I think that I'll kind of talk about it at kind of a high level, but with that being said, I think there's a lot of room for improvement within this process. And I'll talk about that after. But generally, for a person who has behaviors of concern, and especially for a person where it's identified that restrictive practices are currently in place as a result of that behavior of concern, that person would be referred to a behavior support practitioner. So a behavior support practitioner is someone that the National Disability Insurance Scheme Quality and Safeguards Commission has identified as being suitable to deliver behavior support services. That person would then accept the individual as a participant client for services. The first thing that practitioner would do is put in some sort of basic interim strategies, kind of do some quick observations, some quick assessment to kind of see what's going on for the person. And put in a few strategies right away that might be able to better support that person, such as, changing aspects of the environment around the person or starting to, put in some strategies to teach communication. Then the practitioner would do a functional behavior assessment. So the functional behavior assessment is that process of identifying, why is this behavior happening? What function does it serve? What's the communication purpose behind this behavior? And so a functional behavior assessment might be carried out in a variety of different ways. It might involve conducting interviews with the person or people who know the person well, spending time with the person and doing direct observations, talking with support workers, collecting data on the frequency of the behavior, the duration of the behavior, the intensity of the behavior, looking at incident reports. Then the practitioner is going to sort of review all that information and identify what are the contexts in which this behavior is most and least likely to occur. What does the behavior look like? What is sort of the range of the behavior and the level of risk? What are the things that typically happen before the behavior, or antecedents or triggers that seem to set off the behavior? And then how do people typically respond when the behavior happens? Or the consequences. And through that process, we can discover, what is it that this behavior is, what purpose does it serve, and how is it helping the person sort of communicate their wants and needs? Once we've done the functional behavior assessment, then we want to move towards the development of a comprehensive behavior support plan. And this is a behavior support plan that really describes strategies for helping the person learn to communicate their wants and needs in safer and more understandable ways, looking at ways to change the environment around the person to better promote their participation and their well-being. We might be looking at teaching other skills as well. So teaching, independence with making choices, being able to go out into the community safely, being able to spend time with family and friends, being more independent around the house. And that behavior support plan will also describe, if the person does engage in behaviors of concern, how should everybody respond to try to quickly and safely de-escalate the situation without the use of a restrictive practice. And then the conditions under which a restrictive practice might be implemented when there's a significant safety concern. Then once the plan is developed, there should be implementation coaching. So the practitioner spends time with the implementing provider, coaching support workers, or if it's in family context, coaching family members, implementation of those strategies. And finally, the collection of information about the effectiveness of that behavior support plan. So we want to look at, is implementation of this plan actually associated with improvements or increases in positive behaviors and decreases in behaviors of concern? And behavior support practitioners should be able to look at those data, analyze those data, and make decisions about the effectiveness of the plan. And importantly, if the plan isn't working well, to be able to problem solve. Why isn't the plan working for this person? What do we need to do to make revisions to the plan so that it does better support the person and we can really achieve those meaningful outcomes for the person? So that's sort of the process from end to end. I probably skipped some steps there in terms of needing to lodge paperwork with the commission, which I think is where people probably spend too much of their time, and it's actually taking them away from doing the really meaningful work. So I'm not going to spend time talking about that, but that's kind of the high level, process from end to end.
Yeah, and just to distill that, just so I can make sure that I understand it, also maybe simplify it for some others listening. So stage one, we're sort of really talking about you go meet a participant. Essentially, you're going to get a bit of a quick feel for what's going on. Essentially, do a bit of a risk assessment and find out, hey, what do we actually really need to do based upon what we can see? But it's only a one take, right? So you might be wrong just to be able to understand behavior. You're going to have to see that over time. So once you do that, you might do some basics of strategies and changes. Then you move on to the more comprehensive. That's when you're sort of becoming, you're like a behavior detective, right?
Exactly.
So now you start to look at, what's the function, getting in behind that, you're getting data to sort of support that, understanding how big the impact is, if it's a high risk, low risk, whatever it might look like. So you're sort of understanding that. And then from all that getting distilled into what you think's going on, you can then put your main plan together. And then it's a bit of a do, reflect, learn sort of process realistically, but through the basis of science and through having a look at gathering information. But one of the big things I think that needs to be discussed there, or certainly flagged up, is that's really important about the key stakeholders. So you might have participant, family, if they're in a SIL, so supported independent living, or wherever they're situated. You might need to talk to various different support workers and the allied health team. So it's very much a stakeholder management and engagement piece, because your data, if your data is no good, then your FBA might not, which is functional behavior analysis, might not come up as good as well. Does that sort of sound like it's relatively on point?
Yeah, look, I think one concern that I have about the way that this work is carried out is that often I think practitioners attempt to do a lot of this work behind the scenes and spend a lot of time writing written documents, like writing reports or writing behavior support plans, when the magic really happens when you're spending time with the person and their support team. And so the more time that can be spent getting to know the person, getting to know the support team, spending time collaborating with the support team, working as partners with the support team. So that could include support workers, family members, teachers, friends, whoever it is that's directly supporting that person day to day. The more time that we spend with them working as partners in the process and consulting with them and giving them a voice, including the person with disabilities in the development of the behavior support strategies and plans, the better the process is going to be and the higher quality the outcomes are going to be. Unfortunately, the way that the system is currently designed, I think that there's a lot of factors that are pulling away behavior support practitioners. And they're spending more time by themselves behind a computer screen typing up documents than they are actually engaging face to face with the person in the team. And I think that's a real challenge with how the current system is set up. It's very reporting heavy, it's very document heavy, it's very lodging information heavy. And I think it is pulling people away from doing the core work. And I think that's a real challenge that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. So ultimately, behaviors, it's like if you were doing dog training. I'm not bringing that up because this is dog training. It's not that at all. But like if you're going to train your dog, you'd probably see what the dog's doing, right? So same, like if you're actually working with a participant, and I'm certainly want to make sure I'm not using that as a parallel. It's more in regards to behaviors best seen, witnessed through finding out, context gathering that you're going to get from talking to family, talking to those that are the support workers, allied health professionals, the participant themselves. So that's where you're going to get your best information.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just sit behind, sit in the background and ultimately just not necessarily make something up, but like as in you need to actually have enough understanding to then make sure that there's distilling of information that is there because you've gathered the right information. Because if you've only got 50% of the information gathering, that's only going to be 50% good, right? Probably not even that, right? Like you need to have enough context. So,
and I think while we're on that topic, I think that when you spend time with the person and their support team and you really get to know what's going on, I think a lot of the time what you start to see is that it's not actually the person with disability who needs PBS. It's everybody around the person with disability. They need coaching and guidance about how to create a more supportive living and learning environment around this person. They need guidance around what actually is a restrictive practice restrictive practice, because a lot of times they don't even know that what they're doing is a restrictive practice. They need education, they need support and coaching. And it's actually through changing the behavior of the people around the person with disabilities that the person with disabilities is going to experience better outcomes and ultimately, learn, participate, and reduce behaviors of concern. But if you're just focused on the person with disability and their behavior, sort of in isolation of all of that, you're going to miss that. And you might be focusing your efforts in the wrong place. So I would say that collaborative work actually allows you to focus your attention on changing the behavior of everybody around the person with disabilities, which I think a lot of times is actually the most important part of PBS.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Getting the education of the team around, but also if you think a participant can, they can. And if you think they can't, they can't. You're right either way. So I think the perceptions and the beliefs, and there's so much more baggage, which we're not going to be able to unpack right now in regards to that, but I think it's definitely worth acknowledging. Whilst we are then on the topic of PBS and what good PBS is, I'd love to go through the essential skills and attributes. So what would you say are the essential skills and attributes that make up a good PBS practitioner? If you want to go world class, we're happy to join that as well.
Sure. Look, I think with PBS, people can come into this field from really diverse backgrounds, which I think is really great. I think first and foremost, as you just mentioned, a good PBS practitioner needs to ultimately believe that people with disabilities are capable. Like they're capable. They're capable of learning new skills. They're capable of having a voice. They're capable of self-determination. And we need to really lift the bar in our expectations and challenge attitudes and beliefs and really move from a deficit view of people with disabilities to a approach, which is fundamentally optimistic and hopeful about what people can achieve. So,
well, that's quite an important one there in regards to that, because ultimately, say if we're talking in the context of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, ultimately speaking about a worse day from a funding sense and lots of stuff, ends up getting the outcomes that you realistically need. But I completely agree with what you're saying there. I mean, we want to be looking at strengths-based because it doesn't help having documents that are written that essentially ruin your self-esteem and all sorts say terrible things about you. So I think that's really important. What I've got out of that first point was about having the right mindset.
Yeah, the right mindset.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think that PBS practitioners need to be really skilled in building a therapeutic alliance with the team and with the person. So what that means is that we don't come in viewing ourselves as the expert where we know everything and we're going to tell you what to do and you're just going to do it our way. But actually you view yourself as somebody who's there to listen and learn and understand what the needs are of the person that you're supporting and the team around them, and work with them as partners in the development of positive behavior support and building that trust, that rapport throughout the process, and really taking those steps to sort of level the playing field and equal power imbalances within the relationship as part of the work that you're doing, because people with disabilities are pretty much always in relationships where there are extreme power differentials.
100%.
And they're often in situations where they're being told, this is what your life is going to look like. This is what's best for you. We know what's best for you. And we call that the presumption of benevolence. The presumption of benevolence is this idea. I'm here to tell you what's best for you. You're not capable. You don't have the capacity to make those decisions for yourself, but I'm the expert and it's okay because I'm here to tell you what's best for you. The presumption of benevolence is no longer how we approach disability service provision in Australia. It's about empowering the person to have a voice and to lead the creation of their own supports with the practitioner working as a partner in that process. So I think a practitioner needs to really have the skills, the soft skills, to develop those relationships, to look at equalizing those power imbalances, and to bring the person with disabilities a voice into the process. And that's not always easy, particularly for people with disabilities who have high communication support needs. And so shout out to my PhD student, Paige Hum, who is currently doing her PhD research around how do you include the voices and choices of people with disabilities who are non-speakers. What does that look like to include their voice in the process?
I think just whilst we're on that, I think that's an important point you make. So we talk about therapeutic alliance. Well, a couple of things there. I mean, this is, I'll shoot it out and we'll see where we come back with. One of the things I often will do when I go out to an appointment is I'll often say, hey, is there a question you'd like to ask of me first? So ultimately, practitioners will come out and there's this whole, I do this in interviews as well. So I sort of think, hold up, like as in this is going both ways. So there might not actually be a good fit with us to start with, but also if they want to ask a question back the other way. But I think it's important to then have it be known that you are holistically welcome here. It's not about me interrogating and finding stuff out. I think maybe this leads into one of the points that we did discuss briefly earlier in regards to that there's a lot of time and money that's spent on the assessment and the building of the plan rather than actually building the capacity, but also the relationship.
Yes.
Because ultimately there's so much trust there. There's retelling your story. There's so many things like that, right? And then you also want to make sure that you have conversations with all the other different stakeholders.
Right.
You don't want to feel like you've got this commercial lens or the ability of, oh, I'm running out of hours. I've got to get writing this report, because what if I write the report and then I haven't got the key bits of information? So there's that skill there, I guess, in regards to making sure that you can build that relationship, understand what is really happening, build that psychological safety, I think is a good one there. I use Charles Duhigg. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's written a book called Super Communicators, and they talk about really making sure that there's psychological safety and making sure that the person can express themselves. So I think that that's really important to build that therapeutic alliance from what you're saying there.
And I think we also have to recognize that people with disabilities who have perhaps quite a long history of engaging in behaviors of concern have likely experienced adversity. I mean, just think about not being able to communicate your basic wants and needs day in and day out for your entire life. That is adversity over and over and over again that is likely to result in cumulative harm that can present as trauma. And so if we are supporting people with that presentation, we also need to be really trauma aware in the work that we're doing. And therapeutic alliance, building the therapeutic alliance, is a trauma-informed component. It's about building trust, taking time to listen, equalizing power dynamics in the relationship, and working together to sort of co-construct what the future could be. And all of those are consistent with the principles of trauma-informed practice. And so I think that's the added benefit is we're not necessarily going to know if every client that we're supporting has a history of trauma, but we should assume that any client that we support that walks through the door has experienced adversity simply as a result of having a disability and engaging in behaviors of concern. And we need to be trauma aware in our interactions with them always.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, sorry, going through our list, I'm mindful of a couple other questions I'd love to get through in the essence of time. We've gone through, say, mindset. There's also that making sure that we build that therapeutic alliance. What about like analytical skills, report writing? What sort of skills are we talking about? As a nutshell, if you could have 5 or 7 skills for a positive behaviour support practitioner that's going to be excellent, what would they be? We've said mindset and therapeutic alliance, which is a communication piece, I would sort of say.
I think the next one, which probably encompasses a couple of different skills, is being well-versed in evidence-based practice. So evidence-based practice isn't the same as unevidence-based practice. So it's not a single type of intervention that has evidence that it works in peer-reviewed research, but evidence-based practice is a process. And it's a process of being familiar with research and what research has shown to be effective for supporting people with disabilities who engage in behaviors of concern. Then it involves understanding the strengths, the goals, the values, the needs of the person that you're supporting and their family, their care team, which is through building that therapeutic alliance. And it's integrating those two things using your clinical judgment and wisdom to develop supports that are individualized to meet the needs of the person. So a skilled behavior support practitioner should not just take what we know about what works from the pages of peer-reviewed journals and just plop them down on people. We have to adapt what we know works from the research to meet the needs of this unique person who is in front of us. And that takes skill. So a good practitioner should have the skill to be able to adapt and individualize behavior support strategies to meet the needs of the person. And then once those strategies are implemented, a good practitioner should be able to collect ongoing information. I say information instead of data because data scares people sometimes, but collect information about how well those strategies are working. That could be data on the frequency, the duration, the intensity of behaviors of concerns, the number of incidents, the number of restrictive practices, but it could also be people's perceptions of how well those strategies are working through talking with people or other pieces of information. And then the practitioner needs to use that information to make decisions. Is this working well for the person and we should continue? Or more importantly, is this not working? Are we not seeing the desired outcomes? And we actually need to sit down and we need to analyze, why is this not working? What are the challenges? How do we make changes to the plan so that we can actually move forward in ways where the plan is working in supporting the person? So it's really about being responsive and continuing to maintain that relationship with the person and the team after the plan is being implemented, to analyze, is this working? Is this helping move the person towards those valued outcomes? And if not, then we need to make a change. And I think that's where things often fall apart in today's professional practice of behavior support. I worry that that's not happening often enough due to, time constraints, lack of funding, but that's the most important part.
Yeah. So I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm hearing with the evidence-based practice, it's actually made up of a couple of different things. So obviously there's the evidence, information gathering, data collection, whatever you use the name with it. But like saying, that's where your analytical sort of skills, that's where also there's stakeholder management and engagement. You're also, I think the analytical skills covers the whole aspect of you working out, well, hold up, like this is what the evidence says, this is the information I have in front of me, this is the subjective, objective information I've got. So like, hold up, is this actually working or is it not? And then ultimately navigating a path forward. So
exactly.
To see, is it effective or not? And then what are our next steps to? Is that kind of the essence of what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. That ability to think analytically and to integrate information from multiple different sources to make decisions is such an important skill. And it's an iterative skill because the information that you gather changes over time. And what that information tells you is changing over time. So it's not a one-off activity, but it's an activity that has to occur in a very sort of planned cyclical way throughout the journey of working together with that person and their family. And that's really about being responsive to the person's needs as they change over time, and being able to make changes in the way that we support the person as their needs and values and goals and all of that changes over time. That's where the magic happens. That is not what happens when we write a plan and lodge it with the commission.
No, I totally
so that's where, we need to shift our thinking.
Well, let's jump into industry insights there. I think this is useful. So what's working well with PBS? I mean, particularly, we talked just prior to the podcast starting, training, coaching, and supervision, like as in what is working well, particularly from that lens. It sounds like when that's in place, PBS is working well, but when it's not, then maybe it's not working so well. What do you see in regards to training, coaching, and supervision, particularly that we should be seeing?
Yeah, look, I think that we certainly have people who are delivering excellent services and who are, accessing supervision, participating in supervision, providing that implementation coaching on the ground, sort of walking the walk with the person and their support team. But I worry that that's not the majority. And I think that there are a lot of factors that are taking people away from doing the most important work. For example, an overemphasis on paperwork to meet reporting requirements or legislative requirements, and funding being allocated to those activities instead of funding being allocated to the coaching, the therapeutic relationships, the spending time with the person.
So like the 90-30 split?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe
One.
something like that.
That's the typical
So
one.
I think we do have to recognize a challenge that we're currently facing in the way that the service system is set up right now, which is that it feels like, and my colleague Brent Hayward has written about this, it feels like positive behavior support is being defined in the legislation as a written document. It's a written plan. And it's a gateway to continue to use restrictive practices. In other words, if you want to authorize the use of a restrictive practice, you have to do that within the context of a positive behavior support plan. And so I worry that people view PBS simply as a gateway to the use of restrictive practices. But if we come back to my original definition of PBS, PBS is not a written plan. Nowhere in that definition did it talk about writing a plan. PBS is a systems approach to building capability of people with disabilities and their support teams to experience a whole host of good outcomes. And in order to do that work well, we have to build the capability of the people around the person with disability and build the capability of ourselves as behavior support practitioners to embody all of those qualities that we talked about. And so how does that happen? Well, we need to really look at supervision within the PBS workforce and how that's happening. I think supervision has a really important role to play in helping build the capability of behavior support practitioners to do this work well. But supervision right now is really difficult because there's no minimum standards to be a supervisor. There's sort of no, you have to show that you've worked for this long or you've achieved these outcomes or you've done this additional training. So I think that there's perhaps there's a lot of people delivering supervision where maybe they're not quite ready for it yet. And there's just a lack of entry points to becoming a supervisor. But I think the supervisor is such a critical person in lifting the workforce and increasing the bar to achieve better outcomes,
100%. I think like the whole self-assessment, I mean, we spoke about this sort of stuff prior. I think what's really important, I mean, like say, for example, in our organisation, we've got the team that gets together. So Rowena Cornish is the lead for our team. And then we've got, we always have, each department will have an external supervisor because we think it doesn't matter how good you are, that you can always learn, you get better. We see ourselves very much as a learning organisation. So we're lucky enough to have Joe McRae, who teaches at the Flinders University PBS course that is done there. We think that that's a really good framework to have in place. So everyone then does learn and gets that continual supervision and that progression, because ultimately we want to see that you're getting better and better over time, not just that you can simply fill out a few boxes.
Exactly.
And go from core to proficient to specialized or advanced, right? I think it's really important to see, if I was an objective onlooker, can I see that the plan that you're writing, Erin, or the one that I'm writing, can I see that this is actually getting done well? Like, as in, are we making sure that you're not only doing well, but like, are you getting better as well? Because I think ultimately you owe it to yourself as a practitioner. You've got your CPD hours, right? So that means that rather than just doing all the stuff that we think is fun, I think we need to devote it to what's going to implement and increase our practice as best as possible. And as you mentioned, you've got your supervisors. So the supervisors know what they're talking about, and maybe we need to build a better cohort of that and standardization around that, add coaching into it, and then make sure that the continuous learning that do reflect learn cycle. It's almost like PBS 101 again.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. It's like we have that PBS cycle for how we support the person with disabilities. We need to take that same cycle and apply it to how we build our own practice expertise and how we reflect on our own professional development and continuous improvement within our own work. And so I think supervision is a missing link right now. I think that we talk about it, but there's really no clear consensus on what it should involve, who's qualified to do it, how we know that it's good quality. And I think that that is an area that we need to focus on moving forward to really lift, the standards of the field.
Yeah, no, that makes quite a lot of sense. And I think the industry would be great in order to see across the board that that is improving because naturally, if you're a core proficient or an advanced specialized practitioner, there's no differentiation in regards to what you're billing. It's the same in psychology and allied health, someone that's got 1 year versus 10 years. I mean, we know that one's more skilled than what the other is. And I'm not making a point for necessarily paying less or anything. I want to have the system and the incentives to be in order for you to get better, because I think we do owe that to make sure that we are providing the best practice, because the participant's got to be at the core, right? I mean, we talk about that all the time. Let's actually start living and breathe that, you know?
Yes. Absolutely. Look, I think moving forward, where we go from here, I think we need to start looking at a more robust system for credentialing behavior support practitioners, looking at, models used by other professions in terms of formal regulation through APRA or professional self-regulation. I think we need to look at lifting the standards for sort of those entry points into the profession. We also need to get some consensus around in-university training programs for people who want to go on and work as behavior support practitioners. What are the core competencies, skills, knowledge that they should be learning at university so we can ensure that the way PBS is taught, there's some consistency across graduate or even undergraduate, however that looks in the future. There's some consistency in that approach. And then I think we need to really clarify and define what supervision should look like in this space. What are the standards to be a supervisor, and how do we start to lift capability through defining good quality supervision? So I think those are three really important areas for focus moving forward.
Well, that's perfect. I think maybe what we might do, just to add some value to those new time listeners or maybe practitioners, because the space is certainly going to grow, right? So if you were a new grad positive behaviour support practitioner, what would you want to have them have in place? So like, what might you be looking for? For example, if you walk in, like as in what's the supervision structure it looks like? What would you be doing in your own time? How might you be tracking your progress? So let's say over whether it's 6 to 18 months that you might be able to go from core to whether you end up moving to proficient or not. That's not necessarily the point, but you're getting better. How might you facilitate that progress to ensure that they're actually getting better? And what would you expect to have them in place? Let's say if I was the team member, I'm a core practitioner, what advice would you give to me?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, find a good supervisor, find a reputable supervisor. And so a reputable supervisor is somebody who has practice experience, who's practicing at a level at least above you in terms of their registration, that has worked with clients with needs that are similar to the clients that you're going to be supporting, and can document that they've achieved good outcomes. We want to work under supervision with people who have achieved success in their own roles. So really, I think practitioners need to be interviewing supervisors. They need to be asking questions and really making sure that the supervisor's background and skill set is a good fit for what they're hoping to learn. Then I think we need to be really clear on what are the goals of the practitioner? What are the areas where the practitioner wants to improve, where they want to build their skills, where they want support? So we almost need to develop a really clear professional development plan, perhaps that's aligned to the capabilities on the PBS capability framework, but really identifying what are the goals, what are the areas that you want to be building and refining, and how are we going to come up with a plan to achieve that together. So being really clear about what your goals are, what you're hoping to get out of supervision, and how you're going to achieve your goals. And then I think it's about having realistic expectations about how many clients you're going to serve, like how many billable hours can you deliver within a week or a fortnight or a month, because you do need time. You do need time for your own reflective practice, for your time to spend with your supervisor in those discussions. Or maybe it's not always discussions with your supervisor, but establishing like a peer supervision group or a community of practice with other practitioners who are working at a similar level, and spending that time talking through challenges, problem solving, thinking about, ways to sort of address any issues that are coming up, and looking at the literature, becoming familiar with research, learning how to integrate research into your practice. I think those are all really, really important things. And those are the things that tend to get pushed to the bottom of the priority list when delivering a high number of billable hours goes to the top of the priority list. So I think that it's like, what for a new practitioner, what are the systems within the organization that you work within that are going to prioritize and support your own professional development side by side with expectations about, the number of billable hours that you should be delivering?
No, I think that's perfect. I think there's what's useful there as well as the dilemma in regards to because of the explosion of NDIS and lots of stuff is that salary and wages and lots of stuff have been going up, right?
Yeah.
So then if you get paid more, you're expected more, right? So then there's this whole billable hours things that comes into it. So it's just like, well, maybe the highest amount of money isn't necessarily the best thing for you in regards to you developing your practice. Maybe you hone your skills and craft, and as you do that, you then become more skillful and capable to then deliver upon whatever that might look like, so that you actually in your own training and learning. We're up to our last question. So our last question of the day is the future. 20 years into the future in PBS. So looking ahead, how do you envisage the evolution of PBS over the next 20 years, particularly in the context of the disability sector? What changes or advancements do you hope to see?
Look, I think first and foremost, I think we need to focus on professionalizing positive behavior support. So what I mean by that is we need a more robust system for professional credentialing in positive behavior support, more clearly defined entry points for people to come into the profession. And through that professionalization of the workforce, I think we will start to lift practice standards and the capabilities of practitioners. I think that we need to think about what does it really mean to do good practice in the NDIS context in Australia? There's a lot of talk about things that we think are important, but I don't think we know what it means or how to do it well. So for example, there's a lot of talk about how to consult with the person with disabilities in the development of their own positive behavior support plan. I think we need new research that actually shines a light on what does it mean to really authentically consult with a person with disabilities in the development of their own positive behavior support plan. How does that happen? And how do you do that for people who don't speak? Like, what other strategies can you use to bring their voices into the process? And I think that is not something that we say consult with the person with disabilities. How? What does that look like? How do you do that? And I think we need to really start to learn more about what that can look like in practice. And then in Australia, disability policy and legislation is so strongly underpinned by the human rights model of disability, or this idea that the services that we deliver should protect and uphold the rights of people that we work with. How? What does that look like? What does it look like to uphold human rights in the day-to-day practice of positive behavior support? How are practitioners doing that? And is that what people with disabilities want? Are we doing it well? I think there's so much more work to be done to really identify and describe what it means to protect and uphold human rights in practice. It's not just getting rid of restrictive practices, although that's part of it. It's so much more than that. And so I think focusing on that aspect of it is going to be really important. And then finally, I think really redefining what we mean by positive behavior support. Positive behavior support is not a written document. Positive behavior support is a whole of system approach. It's something that is infused throughout every aspect of how a service provider organization operates. And I think we need to do a lot more thinking about what a systems approach or a multi-tiered systems of support model for PBS could look like in a service provider organization. They've done this better within schools. So schools have developed something called school-wide positive behavior support, which is a tiered model of supporting students with behaviors within schools. It also really articulates the systems that sit around the use of those evidence-based practices. We don't really have that in PBS and home and community settings. It's really about individualized support, individual positive behavior support plans. I think there's huge scope to rethink PBS as something that we do before a person even needs a behavior support plan. How can we meet the needs of all people with disabilities early in ways that prevent the development of behaviors of concern and actually prevent the need for an individual positive behavior support plan? How do we ensure that that support workers, families are able to use things like capable environments, active support, ensure that people with disabilities are having their healthcare needs met early on, making sure that we are supporting communication always and in all ways. And I don't think that our system is set up for that. And I think we need a complete rethink of what PBS is and what it could look like in Australia. So I hope over the next couple of years, we'll be doing some new research that kind of advances those discussions. I think it's an exciting time, but I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Oh, I can see your passion and enthusiasm just exudes from you, which is great. We need more people like you in the sector. That does bring today's episode to an end. I hope you found it educational and learned something from it. As fellow Aussies, you know, there's nothing worse than being stingy. So if you got value from this, please do make sure that you share it with anyone of your friends or anyone who you think might benefit, whether that be a participant, support coordinator, or anyone else in the sector, maybe another PBS practitioner potentially. Erin, before we close off, do you have any final words for our listeners?
I just want to give a shout out to Behaviour Support Practitioners Australia, or BSPA. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of directors for BSPA, but BSPA is a new organization which is here for behavior support practitioners. We are looking to be the peak body representing behavior support practitioners and the professional practice of PBS in Australia. And BSPA wants to advocate for you. BSPA wants to hear from behavior support practitioners about what's important to you, what support do you need, and how can we advocate to government to bring about improvements in the PBS sector. If you are not already a member of BSPA, I would really encourage you to become a member. It's not very expensive. As a member, you get free access to the International Journal of Positive Behavior Support, as well as communities of practice and other professional development events. And there's a lot of exciting things happening at BSPA. So shout out to BSPA, come on over and join us, become a member, and we would love to have you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Erin Leif. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much.